is the world re-engaging with the Taliban? Is this a new Afghanistan, or is it the same Taliban masquerading under new colors? On July 3rd, Russia became the first country to formally recognize the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. What's behind the formal recognition? What does Vladimir Putin gain from this move? Is Russia reinventing an old relationship? And will India follow suit? India already has a technical mission functioning in lieu of an embassy in Kabul. There's an Afghan envoy in place in Delhi. Is this a de facto recognition by India of the Taliban Emirate? Uzbekistan, the United Arab Emirates, and China have sent ambassadors to Kabul. What is China's gain? What is Washington's after its embarrassingly hasty exit in August 2021? This is an Afghanistan that seems to have backslided back to another century, to another time, archaic, misogynist, downright cruel. Reinforced this week by the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice issuing arrest warrants for the top Taliban leaders, Haibatullah Akhundzada, the supreme leader of the Taliban, and Abdul Hakim Haqqani, the Chief Justice, for their crimes against women. Hello, everyone. I'm Neena Gopal. Welcome to Global Express, our weekly deep dive into developments that impact India and its neighborhood. Please click on the New Indian Express and the Global Express icon and subscribe. This week, we look at the complexities, the multiple challenges for an India that is touting multipolarity and strategic autonomy, but must navigate an increasingly unpredictable United States under President Trump, keep its relationship with major benefactor Russia alive, and tackle the economic and military giant at our doorstep, that is China, which is running circles around India, while talking of reviving the Russia-India-China troika, but all the while building up the Pakistan army and now reaching out to the Taliban as well, which is sitting slap bang in the middle of this geopolitical maze. So the Taliban. Days after the Taliban issued a statement strongly supporting India on Operation Sindoor against Pakistan, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has called the Afghan Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi and thanked him for Taliban's condemnation of the Pahalgam terror attack. India's Special Envoy on Afghanistan, Anand Prakash, has conferred with Mavlavi Muttaqi in Kabul on April 27th. This is certainly part of India's diplomatic outreach that merits closer attention, especially against the backdrop of a Middle East that continues to remain in the boil, and ISIS-K and Daesh operating with impunity from within Afghanistan. What is behind this? We've seen Mr. Jaishankar, who's just attended the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meet in Tianjin, where he met top leadership and Chinese President Xi Jinping, pushing for aid to Afghanistan. Talking to us on the nature of the Taliban government and whether this is the right time to build ties with Kabul and turn a blind eye to the treatment of women and girls trapped inside, deprived of education and employment in the face of a huge exodus, are a panel of experts on Afghanistan. With us is Professor Raghav Sharma, Director, Center for Afghanistan Studies and Associate Professor, Jindal School of International Affairs at OP Jindal Global University. He has a long association with Afghanistan and with China as well. Professor, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And Sumeer Bhasin, an independent geopolitical Afghanistan analyst and entrepreneur in Afghanistan from 2002 to 2020. He's played a major role now in re-establishing links with the Taliban Emirate, both through the Doha Council and now in Kabul. Welcome, Mr. Bhasin. And last but not least, Ambassador Ashraf Haidari, founder president of Displaced International, an organization committed to advancing conflict resolution, peace building, and tackling the global forced displacement crisis. Distinguished fellow at Arizona State University School of Politics and Global Studies. He's a fellow at New America and a senior fellow at the World in 2050 initiative by the Diplomatic Courier. He was also Afghanistan's envoy in serving in Washington, New Delhi, and Colombo. His personal journey as a former refugee overcoming hardship as a street vendor is a story in itself, Ambassador. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Please, let's start with the impact that the arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, against the Taliban supreme leader Habibatullah Khosada and the Chief Justice will have, Ambassador. What is it that you can expect? Will it change anything on the ground? Because neither of these Taliban leaders can be arrested because they do not even travel outside Afghanistan. What is the point of it then?
Well, morally, the international community is obligated to execute the provisions of multiple treaties to which India, as one of the largest democracies, has acceded. And whether, of course, countries like India will implement on the spirit and as well as the word of the arrest warrants is another issue because the country has been pragmatically engaging with a terrorist extremist group, much like the rest of the region, as you pointed out, abandoning the people of Afghanistan. In other words, India and the rest are dealing with what less than 1% of the Afghan people rejected by over 99% of the people. And remember that these are the same terrorists and extremists that were trained, indoctrinated, and armed in madrasas across the Doran line in Pakistan. And these are the same people that have hit India in the past that, of course, ideologically share common grounds with those that hit India recently, that triggered a war between India and Pakistan. That is an ongoing tension. So nothing changed in their behavior, in their identity, in their ideology. And that's why they're sheltering over 20 terrorist groups from the region and beyond. So the Afghan people are not surprised by these arrest warrants. We welcome them. These are individuals who are committing crimes against humanity. Gender apartheid is only, unfortunately, implemented into 21st century in Afghanistan in the neighborhood of a large or
Well,
largest
that phrase that
democracy
you've
like India.
used, the phrase that you've used on gender apartheid is a very, very interesting usage. But why has the world looked away, Ambassador? And if you could comment on that, Professor Raghav Sharma, why has the world looked away? Because gender apartheid has actually brought about, such hardship to women. And I also I'm very troubled by the stories that come out on about women being not allowed onto the streets, women being deprived of employment, and poverty levels obviously rising because of this very same inability of women to earn. The other brutal stories are of the executions that have been of women on the in the Kabul stadium, and which was all, I thought, a part and parcel of another time and another era when the Taliban ruled. Why has it come back, and why are the women fighting back? I mean, I've got so many questions on the women's issue, but we can start with the brutality and
Well,
why the world has turned a blind eye to this.
at the heart of the problem is the weakening of the rules-based world order, the weakening of these liberal institutions in place, including the United Nations, of course, the gross violation of the United Nations Charter, as we see on a daily basis by very prominent major state actors pursuing pragmatically national security agendas, trampling on the values which they had embraced, but now, unfortunately, they've abandoned. And that's why you pointed out India's being strategically autonomous. What that means is that India doesn't necessarily abide by its treaty obligations, and that includes vis-a-vis gender apartheid enforced by a terrorist extremist group with which India has pragmatically engaged in order to have security intelligence presence on the ground in rivalry and competition with Pakistan and China, and the rest are doing the same, completely abandoning the people of Afghanistan. But we argue that abandoning the values driven foreign policy is on the long run to the detriment of those countries' core national security objectives and goals. We've seen that in case of India, on and off, dealing with these groups, and these same very groups having hit India again and again and again. And India just almost went to a war, which now President Trump claims to have somehow mediated and ended. But that absolutely is rooted in exactly what the Taliban are doing in Afghanistan against 40 million people, something that we encourage neighbors, which the Afghan people really used to hold in high regard. Remember,
Yes,
India used
absolutely.
to be the most popular with the Afghan people of all our neighbors in the region. That's not the case. You don't see even a single tweet about anything India these days. If you just go back, has India's foreign policies shifted and embraced the Taliban against 40 million people? The Afghan people have also, reversed their support for not the people of India, but the government in place in India. And it's
That's true.
tragic. It's unfortunate that this government has failed to balance between, maintaining ties with Afghan people, but yet pragmatically were only necessary for obvious reasons to maintain a degree of engagement with the Taliban.
Professor Raghav Sharma, if you could come in, I mean, what is the impact that you've seen on on the women's, the employment of women, and because if they've been reduced to poverty, and if they actually the treatment is this brutal. I mean, there are disappearances. I hear that there's a popular singer called Zulala Hashmi who's gone missing now. Uh, what do we?
Ne-
How do?
Nina, there are
Why?
many
Why?
layers to there are
Yeah,
many
tell me.
layers to the question. You've actually packed in several questions, and all of them
Yes.
one could have like a lengthy discussion. But to put things in perspective, yes, the world order has been torpedoed in the last couple of years. The idea of a rules-based liberal world order that has been torpedoed by a number of developments over the last couple of years. And India essentially is, following in the footsteps of most other states that are engaging in a very transactional relationship with the Taliban, seeing them as a power which is here to stay,
Yes.
completely throwing, issues of women's rights, etc., under the bus, so to speak. In fact, the whole discourse on women's rights was largely discredited in the way the United States, um, you know, entered and subsequently exited Afghanistan. So they instrumentalized women's rights, but then you had, the top tier American leadership turning around and saying, we are not going to send our boys to Afghanistan to secure women's rights. So why should our boys die to secure the rights of Afghan women? It's their problem, it's their
But
business.
what is the
You know,
point, Professor, of then having this ICJ and the
and
ICC?
yeah, I'll just
Yeah,
come to that.
sure.
But I mean, this is Afghanistan is one case in point. Look at what happened in Xinjiang, right? What has the
Hmm.
CCP done? They're effectively running modern day concentration camps, or what has been happening in the Middle East, right? So Afghanistan is not sort of a flash in the frying pan, so to speak. This
Hmm.
is happening all over the world. Unfortunately, this is not how it should be, but that is, the world order very often is not how we'd like it to be. So it can be unpleasant, unsavory, so to speak. But India, again, as I said, is not the only state which is doing this. All states, unfortunately, are making a beeline for the Taliban in the hope that
But
it's going to help them secure.
Professor, you have also have someone as respected a woman leader as Fatima
Hmm.
Gilani recently saying that the only way to deal with the Taliban is to talk to the Taliban. And Fatima Gilani, I mean, she was head of the Red Crescent Society. And you also have Omar Zakriwal, the former Afghan foreign minister, who's returned to Kabul and who's saying there's no alternative but to talk to the Taliban. So I mean, there is something that is driving this move to re-engage with the Taliban.
But
Why?
why are we so surprised looking at the Taliban's attitudes towards women? This is after all an ideological movement, and there's actually a lot of work out there that when Taliban took control of districts when the republic was in existence, one already had a glimpse into what their attitudes towards women and women's education would be, and many Afghans had warned the international community that, that essentially women's rights are going to be thrown under the bus as soon as the Taliban gain power. I mean, look at the Doha deal. It doesn't have one sentence on protecting women's rights or human rights, or the Afghan constitution of 2004. So let's start from there. You know,
Mm.
there were fundamental problems in the way this whole process was, the in the way the United States went about this whole process. So I think the Afghan problem has to be framed in this larger context where this rules-based order essentially has been torpedoed by a number of developments in the geopolitical front. So one has to read it in that context. In terms of the Taliban pushing women into poverty, yes, that is not just poverty. I mean, suicide rates have skyrocketed. But at the
Mm.
same time, what I hear from many of my friends across the country is that implementation seems very patchy. So in some areas, the implementation is very strict, but there are other areas in which they're turning a blind eye. I don't want to name the cases, but I know, from extended family friends, of their female cousins being allowed to work in NGOs, being allowed to work in certain UN offices, and then suddenly, one day they're told, go sit at home, you can't come.
My gosh.
There are others. I have friends who also work with secret schools for girls, and I asked one of them who has cousins in the GDI. I said, "You're not scared?" And he said, "Well, some of them know that we are sort of doing this work, but they just choose to look the other way."
Mm.
So implementation remains patchy, but this is undoubtedly having an adverse impact on women. I mean, China, which claimed, the CCP claimed women hold up half the world sky. They're
My
totally
God.
mum on women's rights. Look at the European Union. Where has all their rhetoric gone on women's rights?
So this the gender apartheid that Ambassador Haidari has has very made a great catchphrase for this crisis that women are facing in Afghanistan. He's also written a fantastic article. I must congratulate you, Ambassador Haidari, on the fact that you say that the 80 decrees which have been issued by the Taliban restricting women's rights, which has seen that that girls are no longer able to study beyond sixth grade. Women are barred from public life, they're barred from employment, and mothers are now sending their children to madrasas to get food with this huge risk that they face of, being recruited for terror operations at home and abroad. So you're also saying that this is that you're losing critical human capital. So Professor Raghav, you were telling us some anecdotal, you
Yeah,
know,
I mean, what I was hinting at was that yes, I mean, I think there is certainly no better term to describe what's happening than a gender apartheid, because what you've seen is a total purging of women from the public life, yeah, by the regime which now controls the instrumentalities of the state. And there is effectively no peddling back by the Taliban on the question of women's rights. Yet at the same time, what one hears is that implementation still at the moment remains somewhat patchy. So there are areas where implementation is more or less total. There are other areas in which,
but there are underground schools
there are
apparently.
Implementation of what, if I may ask? Implementation of what?
implementation
Implementation.
of these decrees remains
Well,
patchy.
I can talk to that, but I'll let you talk.
Okay.
You can
Uh,
button. You're allowed.
All right, if I
yeah, please go
am,
ahead.
and of course, I have family there and friends and colleagues and etc. So women are effectively imprisoned. Those are sporadic cases. This is not a state actor under any kind of obligations, domestic or global, or any treaties Afghanistan has signed. So today they behave in one way, tomorrow in another way. Those rank and file do not necessarily follow any kind of rules and orders from the top. And as a result, the women are effectively under an apartheid system. And I think that's why the reports of the human rights rapporteur, Richard Bennett, are very clear. That's why he's been banned, because he's been very brutally honest. He's in touch with everyone on the ground and daily reports. So there's no implementation or enforcement, so to speak. But this full enforcement of the gender apartheid, effectively preventing women from any kind of sustainable participation in the polity, economy, and society of Afghanistan. And in other words, they're erased. It's 50%. And this is direct security implication, as I point out in my recent article, that more women at home being depressed, as you pointed out, suicidally depressed, and then
Yes.
sending their children to these mushrooming of madrasas where they get indoctrinated. And what they get indoctrinated is to basically carry out suicide missions at home against Afghans and as well as infidels, which includes India. Let's not forget that. And they've done that in the past. We're recalling from multiple suicide terrorist attacks they carried out on Indian targets before 2021. And so this is something
Yes,
that India has to
they
really
haven't
pay
yet
attention to.
apologized for what they did to the Indian mission in Kabul. Our military attaché and our deputy mission there, both of them died very
Absolutely, and
tragically.
they will do it again. I mean, now the Taliban this time around are smarter because they get advice and as far as how to engage regionally and beyond, simply because they're looking for recognition, which they've been so far denied. And I hope this will continue until and unless they can, step forward to join a results-driven conflict resolution process, which again I discussed in that recent article, that should be supported by the United States under the Union
We'll
auspices
get to the United States in a minute,
with
Ambassador, but I
yeah, with
also want to
regional
talk
buy-ins
about
and support.
I also want to get to the point where you say, I mean, and there are reports now saying that there are 120,000 Afghans who've been forcibly repatriated from Iran.
Sure.
Because and Iran has always been a home, so to speak, for Afghans who were escaping, ordinary Afghans who were escaping the Taliban in when they took over in 2021. But there's also a very interesting story which has just broken about the list of Afghans who were taken or sought refuge in the UK, and that list being leaked by somebody, an UK intelligence officer, which has obviously put all those people at risk.
Absolutely. It's so unfortunate that India, as another sponsor of the Taliban, traditionally speaking, actually brought about this situation in Afghanistan, the conditions that we just discussed under the Taliban, thereby forcibly displacing Afghans to Iran itself and as well as Pakistan, those two neighboring
Are you saying it's
periphery.
because we didn't give them the opportunity to enter India?
Well, yes, I will also come to that. But India, Pakistan have been instrumental in bringing the situation as we see in Afghanistan, the conditions under the Taliban, as we see that have forced Afghans continue to force on a daily basis to migrate out in search of basic human security and a secure future, if possible, in those countries. But again, Iran is unfortunately now scapegoating Afghans in the context of its 12-day war with
Yes.
Israel and charging some Afghans with espionage, which is completely not true, simply because now their MPs, members of parliament, have been coming out to say that one of them just said that he had a meeting with a senior security intelligence official of Iran who told him there's not a single Afghan involved in the 12-day war.
Espionage.
Exactly. But in Iran, to divert the domestic public attention from its, you know, intelligence failures during that, 12-day period, which led to the assassination of their top leadership, as we know. So it's unfortunate that India's kicked out now almost 1 million Afghans soon, and in the span of a few months. And just over the past week or so, they've deported forcibly around 500,000 Afghans, which I consider as a collective punishment, which is again a crime against humanity, given that a lot of Afghans in Iran had been registered, had purchased properties, had been working for different companies, their wages not paid, their savings still in the banks not paid, their properties is still, in possession of Iranians, and the belongings, they didn't even have an opportunity to sell their belongings. This really reminds me of the India-Pakistan partition and how, people were forced to migrate, abandoning everything. It's so tragic
Mm.
and catastrophic, and yet no one really speaks up about it, including India, where it should. But India itself is here involved in more or less the same manner, having denied a large number of Afghan students who had completed half of their education in India to return and complete the rest of their education. Remember, India really took pride in helping
That's
educate
true.
Afghans, most of whom returned and helped run the state, and helping in institutionalizing our shared values. So India has now taken certain steps, from what I'm hearing, allowing Afghan patients to come back and seek treatment. But I hope that this will open up India for people-to-people
That's
ties
good.
that we used to have before 2021.
Mr. Bhasin, if I could bring you in, I'm sorry, I know you've heard this entire criticism of India and Taliban, resurrecting, setting up a new relationship. What do you feel? I mean, this is we've also seen Russia, formally recognizing Taliban, as a government, they heading the emirate. What do you think India will do? I mean, firstly, I'd like to also ask you why Russia has done this, and secondly, should India follow suit?
Uh, Thanks, Neena. First, I would, I respect Hedri Saab's disappointment at multiple levels with India, and but he should understand that because in all his conversation, he never took the name of the US. It was
We
the
are getting
US.
to the US. That's a very important question.
Okay, India. He has to understand that
That's the
India.
core problem. I will get to it. Don't worry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
That's the
so will
matter of the
I.
problem.
yeah. Harry Saab, you have to understand that India's presence in Afghanistan pre-Taliban takeover in August 1521 was anchored within the previous uh, uh, time, that 2 decades after 9/11, on the US presence there, right? And it was the US which, whether you like it or not, and there's one impact on which is happening everywhere. It happens in Gaza. It happens. See, the geopolitics drives states to take hard decisions, and unfortunately, there is suffering, right? And it's very unfortunate. And because Raghav and I have both lived there personally in Kabul, and have made personal, invested in personal relationships, we share, we fully, sympathize and understand that suffering, because we've experienced, built those relationships, built at it first time. As far as coming to your point on, and then I'll come to Russia quickly, Nina,
Yeah.
on on India's strategic autonomy and our the state's behavior. I will call it state behavior very closely, and our options post Taliban takeover in 21. India's security with the situation at that time, as you'll see, China had aggressed in Galwan, and after, in 20, and we were facing a two-front war. So the security establishment and their considerations naturally took paramount consideration in policy making, because India did not, very, we could have, frankly, the two policy options broadly was, we could have sympathized and not really engaged with the Taliban, but then we would have basically opened ourselves to bigger security risks, both in terms of energy. Like I say, it's unfortunate. It's not a decision which we happily pursued, but
No,
it
no,
was.
I'm not saying that India shouldn't have engaged, and I have always allowed for that. Major states of interest, they have to, for security reasons, have to have presence on the ground. But what India should not have done is not to have abandoned the people of Afghanistan. Like, what is the fault of, students, for example? That's a good example. Or Afghans seeking medical
Medical.
treatment in India. I don't think if they would pose any kind of threat to India, they were all screened. It's not easy to get an Indian visa. The US embassy, I'm saying, the Indian embassy is very good at checking their background, going through interviews on both sides with the students, with the universities, to make sure that those students are clean and good to
That
go.
that
And
that
unfortunately,
Ashok,
even our former government officials, people really helped India in a variety of ways. I've heard cases of Afghans arriving with diplomatic passports, which India always honored, have been denied entry at airports, especially in Delhi. It's tragic. It's unfortunate that how can you treat and mistreat your friends, people that work with you, people that hosted you, people that hosted Professor Sharma, and then suddenly turning a blind eye. Why do you have to do that? What do you
that
lose
that I
between
totally
feeling by
agree.
doing that?
That
I
that
don't think,
there is
yeah, there is any disagreement. If anything,
no,
we've
that
been very
Raghav,
vocal
that I
about that.
totally agree. I cannot say for the administration, but that there is not a we should have managed that better. We had these discussions at Raghav was part of that at our various think tank forums here, and every time this issue was used to come up, and even our former ambassadors, this had actually not agreed with this policy and this total sort of shutdown. I remember the numbers because I was there in India GSA. Afghan embassy Indian embassy in Kabul alone used to issue about 500 to 1,000 visas a day,
My gosh.
and they were extra, they were free. So and I have no excuse. It's
Mr.
something.
Bhasin, Mr. Bhasin, but if you can just look at what India hopes to achieve by re-engaging with this Taliban government, because I mean there is an element within this Taliban government which is still very pro-Pakistan. I mean you have the Kandahar and you have Kabul and you have Doha. All for various purposes. As you've said before, that Doha is to engage with the on foreign policy, but within the Taliban government, the schism that is there, that exists, which has a pro-Pakistan leaning and not so much pro-India leaning anymore. But how do we tackle that? I mean, knowing that, and yet we're engaging with them.
Neena, because see, like I said, the security consideration was so that is the secondary. The primary dynamic was the states, our bordering states on the north and their presence in Afghanistan, and our presence not being there or not being there. That was the primary concern. Then what you are saying is secondary. When you engage, you understand you cannot have everyone on your side. And in fact, we didn't have everyone on our side even during the Karzai and Ghani governments. So, I'm not comparing that. And
Are we putting our economy and economic concerns and trade concerns, over the
it's
human rights
security.
issues?
It's
It's
Security.
Nina. It's more security than
In the
economic
sense?
because economic is very complicated because till you don't have a viable transit route, we know what is on our west. Right now even air traffic is stopped. So of our airlines, their airlines can operate. So and we have Chabahar as the other alternate economic route, but the complications of sanctions on Iran, it is not effective in any manner whatsoever. What I
Yeah,
would try to
more
say
than
is
that
coming to
now,
the
more than that now, we also need to understand that China is a big player and Russia's entry into this. I would like someone to explain it to our viewers and to
I will
me.
hit on Russia quickly.
Yes,
Russia, I see more as a geopolitical concern. As when they look at the picture, see big states look at pictures not individually to a specific region. It is a bigger chessboard, right, or a jigsaw
yes.
puzzle, whatever you may call it. I think Russia looks at it geopolitically. It's more because of the narco trafficking, not in that order, but their concern with ISKP. Okay, I think that is a strategic concern because guess who they sent there when they did the rapprochement with the Taliban. And there's a long podcast and saying they basically, cleaned up swiped the board because some of the Taliban are part of the Mujahideen which fought the Russians. Okay, so they cleaned
Yeah, that's very interesting.
that board by saying, okay, that is because I heard in the podcast that was Soviet Union. This is Russia. Okay, so
Hmm.
they basically changed the whole conversation on that base. I feel they are giving them because see the gap they are coming into is one is their own concerns, whether it's narcotics or threat of security from ISKP or other groups. The other is the void with the aid has given, because the drop in the aid, the dependence, even the World Food Program is struggling to raise enough countries to donate aid to Afghanistan. Is they have supplied wheat and fuel, and also are looking at providing that without the US dollar. So it's China. So China and Russia are
Russia.
considering trading with Afghanistan without the dollar. So they're looking at an engagement geopolitically and a presence based on that. But their concerns are based on security, and their engagement, they're looking at investment and trade. I don't know how far that will go, but basically that is
Okay,
the sort of the carrot.
I get it. Ambassador, do you agree
Can I
with
just make
this?
one point? I think on security, we have to admit, yes, everyone is legitimately concerned about security, but from a foreign policy making perspective or national security policy or strategy making perspective, these countries need to really connect the dots, the short-term goals with the long-term objectives, knowing that there's no way that they can um, secure any kind of deep strategic partnership with a non-state terrorist extremist actor, which is really up for read by any regional or extra-regional players. And so then also the people of Afghanistan in this geography, where people, of course, these terrorist groups come and go, but the people will stay. And as a result, the states should really balance that in favor of course, the people. And here, I think India could have done and can still reset its foreign policy vis-a-vis Afghanistan, re-embracing the Afghan people, began or resume investing in the people of Afghanistan to resume primarily, which the Afghan people always appreciated it and will never forget, this scholarships program.
Yes.
Admit those who had completed their education midway to bring them back, and as well as bring more Afghans, especially women, because it's any nation's better half that really helps ensure sustainable peace and prosperity. Imagine India without half of its population. Well, now we see even the Gulf states, the custodian of the holy site, Saudi Arabia, is really revamping what it
The
used to
position
be
of
the
women.
case, and inspiring the Taliban. Now, the prince, MBS, is basically harnessing half of its population to help propel and project forward Saudi Arabia as a regional and global power,
In
which is
fact,
impossible,
Ambassador, I'd
which
like
is
to just add
impossible
up.
without half of any country's
Yeah,
population. So what I'm saying, that India shouldn't just do anything of the things that I said for the sake of the Afghan people, but for its own sake. Because as a regional power, at least if not global power, as a regional power, India has a responsibility to ensure that half of its neighbors' population participate in a polity, in society, in economy, that it ensures stability and security in the region, and thereby facilitate the implementation of India's core foreign policy objectives, which is connectivity, of course, and its immediate neighborhood, and absolutely sustainable peace and security on its periphery. I don't think if India will have this under a terrorist extremist regime, as you pointed out, more than half of whom are in the pockets of ISI, naming the Haqqani network, has very deep organic relationship with Pakistan. India doesn't. It's fine for India to have transactional relationships here and there, but India shouldn't abandon the people of Afghanistan,
yes.
building on what we have traditionally, our two nations, regardless of the regimes in place in Delhi or in Kabul. Remember, we had the Marxist communists, but we had a very strong relationship with the people
With
of India.
Najibullah.
In the 1990s, we had that, of course, 20 years of the past before 2021, and then we signed a strategic partnership agreement in 2011, for which the Afghan people bled for months. And we can go back and research to see how many terrorist attacks happened directly because of Afghans signing that strategic partnership agreement, which is very comprehensive with covering sectors from security to the rest. Unfortunately, now India completely abandoned that, embracing a terrorist extremist group and not seeing the forest, but just seeing the trees that are temporarily in place.
Mr. Bhasin, I'll bring you in a minute. I just want to go back to Professor Raghav Sharma and ask him about the fact that the Afghan Taliban government is also an area where there's a hotbed of terrorist groups like ISIS-K, Daesh, and so on. Is this a kind of a would it be a threat to regional security? And how much of that should we take on board in Delhi?
Well, ideologically, I certainly believe that, the landscape has changed ever since the Taliban have taken charge. And that is because there are enough reports to point out that there's been a mushrooming of Dini madrasas across the country. In fact, I think a year ago, the Deutsche Welle had carried a fairly big report on this. That there's been an explosion in the number of madrasas, many of them connected to the madrasa network in Pakistan. And this is going to pose an ideological challenge because ideology doesn't need visas essentially to travel, right? The movement of ideas today is faster and on a scale and on a pace that is rather difficult to control and to monitor. So this is undeniably, I think, a challenge. And as I said earlier, also, this madrasa network has played a role earlier as well in being a fertile breeding ground for groups like the Taliban. What we've seen is that the Taliban have positioned themselves certainly as a bulwark against the Daesh. But remember, Daesh is only one of the groups that is operating in Afghanistan. There are so many others with whom the Taliban have organic and inorganic links.
Is this why
What do
China is
you
also engaged with the Taliban because of the Uyghurs?
Yes, although I believe that the Chinese have somewhat overstated, overblown the Uyghur threat from Afghanistan in direct terms, because I don't think the Uyghurs have the capacity to launch a direct physical attack from Afghanistan on China. Um, I think the threat will be in other forms. It will be ideological. And for Chinese, I think the problem is not really who governs Afghanistan and what happens in Afghanistan. I believe they are more concerned about developments in Afghanistan spilling over and impacting, other states abutting Afghanistan that are critical for the Chinese. So they're concerned about instability from Afghanistan spilling over into Pakistan, into certain Central Asian republics where they've made investments. So I think that is the larger threat. But coming back to your question, remember, I mean, the Taliban essentially have been fellow travelers with a number of non-state actors, whether it's the TTP, whether it's the Al-Qaeda, whether you're looking at groups now like the Tehrik-e-Taliban Tajikistan, whether you're looking at, groups like the Jamaat-ul-Ahrar. There are a number of other groups. So the Taliban's approach essentially on dealing with, terrorist extremist groups is selective. It benefits them to essentially undercut groups like the Daesh at the moment. But, the larger question is that, they will not essentially cross certain red lines, which is they will not break off ties with groups like the TTP or the Al Qaeda. And I think that is something states have to ponder over before rushing to elevate ties with the Taliban.
That's a very good point. So come back to you, Mr. Basin. You were one of the first people who I remember talking about when we reached out to the Taliban. And how confident are we in Delhi that the Doha Council is the right call for India to make? I mean, because I mean, you have Indian officials like Vikram Misri, the Foreign Secretary, you have Anand Prasad, the new man in charge, all interacting with Mavlavi Mutaki. So, what is India's main goals apart from security? Is it also what we talked about in the past, Mr. Basin, about the rare earths? Everyone says that it's a deal that we had actually arrived at with Kabul in 2011, wasn't it? On the copper mines and so on.
The copper mine is Ainak, which is China. We were
And
working
Hajgi
on
was
the
it?
Haji Gap,
Haji Cup.
Haji Cup.
iron ore mine.
Yes.
And we were awarded the contract, and at that time I remember because the INA, which is also not gone anywhere, which is in Logar, which is
Yes.
30 kilometers south of Kabul, is still not produced a single ounce of copper. So the issue is that, Neena, we had basically, and I was instrumental. This was in the previous regime before Mr. Modi's government. Uh, Basically, looking at sustainable, large, impactful investments as a sustainable economic model rather than just donor and aid. And this was suggested by a friend of mine by the World Bank. And we put in a lot of work, but we were awarded the contract, and of course, it didn't start it. But that was basically anchored on a sort of a public-private partnership, because the mine itself is not viable, because you don't, what in the mine language they call, there is no viable route for evacuation. Finally, you need to get the ore.
Oh, I see. So you
So
mean the
it
copper,
was,
the Haji Cup iron ore mine is
yeah, it is
actually
based
on
in
hold?
Monia. So you needed a 900 odd rail link right up to connecting to Iran and then to Chabar to make that viable. So the plan was that the project would be done based on an understanding that the government of India would basically fund the railway line,
I see.
which is for everyone's use besides the project. So that was the plan. So because our, again, I'm repeating which I said earlier, our access to Afghanistan is for a lack of good words, very delicate, because we have a very friendly neighbor on one side in the west, okay, and then we have a complicated neighbor further west of the neighbor on the west, which is impacted by sanctions. So we have to sort of mitigate or negotiate all these different complications in order to. Whereas I think the driving distance from I will not get into the POK conspiracies, but the driving distance from, if I'm not wrong, from the shortest distance from Atari border to Jalala to the Turkam border is probably, if I'm not wrong, and Haidari Saab may know, is probably point to point is 12 hours. So
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 what is the point of the 12-hour journey?
means if we get access, we that's because
Okay.
these obstacles or blocks are basically complicate our access to Afghanistan. That's why I come back again. Even earlier, so also security and the logistical, because when I was in Kabul, they used to say that Afghanistan is more a logistical nightmare than a security nightmare. You
I
know,
see.
because of these reasons. Because the US, even if you remember, to get in, had to basically pander even to the Taliban when they used to bring in their supplies through Karachi or wherever, to the Pakistanis, and in fact the Taliban when they used to run the corridor or the transport. So
Okay.
as far as India is concerned, quickly, like I said, our main thing was pragmatically to have, addressing your point. We have recently seen reports of the differences after the killing of Khalil Haqqani. The differences between the different factions of the Taliban are out in the open. You've seen recent reports. Even the acting Sirajuddin Haqqani is making all his public appearances only in his stronghold in
That's
the
right.
east. Yeah. So there are, on 2 points. There is, between them there is a power struggle, and addressing that point of which faction. We didn't have an option of not engaging. We just had to go out. And I'll just add to Hedri Saab's comment. India should definitely, because our stated policy is we are with all Afghans. It's not that we've left one for the other, and we should expand that policy and continue to support visas and business and
Yes.
the
That
medical
of course.
tourism and students.
But
Whether
just,
they,
I mean,
irrespective whether they are
maintaining
in
people-to-people
Afghanistan or not.
ties. I think India should not only do that with Afghanistan, but with the rest of the region. And I think
Yeah.
India paid a very heavy price for not doing so with Bangladesh. Look, I
Yes.
mean, it used to overwhelmingly support the regime, but underinvesting in its ties with the people of Bangladesh, and it has cost India. So India shouldn't repeat the same with the Afghan people. Like I said, and a good measure of where the Afghan people were on India is social media. If you go back before 2021, you would see on any given day or week multiple posts I used to see from different groups and individuals and prominent Afghans, influencers about people to people ties, our shared cultures and civilization, and of course our interest in the Indian um, Bollywood and so on and so forth. But unfortunately,
Ambassador,
that's
can we go back to that question which I butted in and stopped you from talking about? What is that the US what can we hope for the United States to do in this current situation? Because right now it looks as if President Trump is not interested in engaging with the Taliban government at all. Yeah.
well, I mean, U.S. As we know, given the MAGA
If I
agenda,
can just if I can
America.
just button for a minute, Raghav, if you want to make your concluding statements, please go ahead. Would you like to make a concluding statement, Professor Raghav Sharma?
Yeah, I mean, all I'll say is that India is behaving like most other states, and as Sumeer pointed out, we have to situate this in the larger context, which is that India is constrained by geography. Our presence was anchored essentially in the American presence. Ambassador Haidari talked about the period of the Soviet invasion. That time too, I mean, India forged ties with the regime, but it didn't earn all around praise with all the Afghan people. I think what India ought to correct, is that while it can engage or it needs to engage the Taliban, it's compelled to engage it like most other states are. I think it must bridge the gap between the rhetoric and reality of being with the Afghan people. It ought to walk the talk, right?
Yeah.
And that's true for so many countries. I mean, look at China. The CCP used to talk about women holding up half the sky. Look at the European Union, right? And their commitment to a rules-based world order. All the rhetoric that the EU engaged in after the Taliban has taken over, it's petered out. Look
Yes.
at how the Americans have been behaving. I mean, unofficially, one hears that one of the American envoys, who I will not name, was in Delhi a year ago and said, if you're not sort of, supporting the Taliban, you're essentially going to be on the wrong side.
Wow.
But states are essentially going for short-term interests, short-term security interests, which I think is not going to help in the long run. So
Okay.
while the Taliban, I think, is here to stay, it is not a monolith. There are schisms within the Taliban, and there are costs that, associated costs that will come with engagement with the Taliban. And I think India can actually learn a thing or two from countries like Turkey and Iran, which are also engaging the Taliban, but they haven't abandoned completely all their old friends. There
Yeah.
are problems, there are different kinds of problems with people associated with the old order. But does it mean you should abandon them altogether? No. So I think
Okay.
we have to strike a balance between engagement and securing our interests, and at the same time, you know, um, not letting go of our commitment to former allies and to certain values. So I think
Okay.
that balance has to be struck.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. If I can come back to you, Ambassador, I was actually looking at what you wrote and how you said that the US should actually spearhead a United Nations backed peace process. Are we aiming this a little too high? Because I mean, if it's led by a US administration which is uninterested in even opening Bagram Air Base, even keeping a minuscule presence in Afghanistan, why would they even look at engaging the UN and as you say, setting up an inclusive Afghan-owned sort of political process,
Well,
which,
what I'm proposing is, all about sustainability. If we just pursue short-term transactional goals, fine, it might serve this administration. But we have seen in the past that the Clinton administration did that, but 9/11 happened because of that. So as a result, this time around, I'm not proposing a kind of military engagement, which of course this administration, given their MAGA agenda, is not interested, but the president is very interested in winning a Nobel Peace Prize. A Nobel Peace Prize will come through robust diplomacy for a results-driven conflict resolution, which the United States could sponsor uh, under the United Nations Charter. And that's what the UN is all about. It has an institutional memory, it has experience, it has expertise. Why not harnessing that to bring all Afghans under one umbrella and one solid peace process and work with the UN to help Afghan sides iron out a sustainable political settlement, one that addresses the core challenge facing the Afghan people, which is the absence of a legitimate and inclusive government. That's the
You've
problem in
also,
Afghanistan.
if I could just come in on that, you've also actually proposed a very interesting idea. You've said that US must pursue a faith-based diplomacy to counter the Taliban's
Absolutely. And
ideological
US has
legitimacy.
leverage. That's because US has now leverage in the Gulf states, as we know, strategically with UAE, with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar. We've
Qatar,
seen recently how US has worked with Qatar on a number of issues in the Middle East, whether vis-a-vis Palestine-Israel issues or whether vis-a-vis Israel and Iran war and so forth. So the U.S. could also leverage that to basically uh, delegitimize the Islam that the Taliban have been introducing to the Afghan people, which the Afghan people reject. That what the Taliban are doing in Afghanistan, including gender apartheid, is nothing to do with Islam. Remember that the wife of Prophet Muhammad was the equivalent of today's CEO, that the Prophet was an assistant to the wife, not vice versa. So women in Islam have played very prominent roles in polity, society, and economy as politicians, as warriors, as business people. And that's exactly what the Afghan people demand and was happening before 2021 with, uh, over 20% of our parliament was composed of women, women as ambassadors, as ministers across the rest of the government, and the business community as well that were thriving, and all of which the Taliban have reversed, all of which now the rest of the Muslim world or Arab world, especially in those countries which initially and recognized the Taliban in the 1990s, are now completely turned around against what they used to practice, are now, as I said, are actually harnessing the energy and the power of women to project their countries forward. And here, U.S. can harness that. Basically, Islam, and especially through the Organization of Islamic Countries, to bring their combined influence to bear on the Taliban to behave, especially if the U.S. Sponsored a UN-led peace process. So U.S. has the leverage on its own regionally. Again, if U.S. Morally engages on the issue of Afghanistan based on a values driven. Again, values shouldn't be seen as values, but values are at the end of the day interests, and
that's
bring
right.
the region on board to help stabilize Afghanistan on a win-win basis, a win for the Afghan people, a win for regional peace and security, favoring the shared interests of China and India, both of which need security on their peripheries, and a win for the rest of the world, and of course a win for the U.S. Homeland Security, because U.S. should be concerned about what's happening under the Taliban. Like we said, gender apartheid, they make it an issue of women, but that is a direct link to security, which we discussed. Women being depressed, sending their kids to indoctrination madrasas, producing suicide terrorists for deployment in the neighborhood and beyond. And we know the influence of those extremists and terrorists online, and as well as those who have crossed the southern border of the United States under
Mr.
the
Bhasin,
previous administration. So there's a credible threats under the Taliban, which the U.S. could offset through a results-driven conflict resolution process to be supported by the region.
Mr. Bhasin, you have very strong ties with Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad. who was actually the special envoy, the special US envoy to Afghanistan. What are his views on the Taliban and keeping this kind of a attitude towards women and anyone who challenges them, going for so long? Would
So
you see him coming in as a special envoy again?
I think so his views are clearly expressed in the public domain. So, of course, he's not in agreement of their behavior, and he's taken a clear position on that. And in fact, that is
Well,
one of the reasons within
I
the
must say that he's lost completely any credibility with the Afghan people on any number of days of protests by the Afghan women, and small numbers or large numbers, and with Afghan politicians. So he is basically a political entrepreneur, unfortunately exploiting some ties here in the US. Even here, he is now rejected by an overwhelming number of Americans, especially in the MAGA, group. Yeah, he's as a neocon. He's still interested in, but this is also a kind of ethnic internal component to what he is pursuing, and as well as a business component to it. So he's a kind of uh, really, unfortunately, crude pragmatist, favoring his own personal career and business interests at the cost of America's long-term national security, and as well as at the cost of a suffering people who have suffered in part because of his influence over the last at least 4 or 5 decades. So he has
Mr.
no place
Bhasin, do
in
you want to comment?
Afghanistan, no place with the women of Afghanistan to speak. And I'm not saying this on behalf of Afghan women. If you just Google, you will see what the Afghan people and the Afghan women think of Zalman Khalilzad.
Mr. Bhasin, do you want to
I
come in and
I
defend him?
I have I reciprocate with the frustration and the I would say gross disappointment of the Afghan people. But I'm not taking sides here, but we should understand that, because if we had, I'm not saying what happened is correct, okay? So for a moment, I'm not making any personal aspirations, but let's put things in prospect. Say if there was a white man instead of Mr. Khalilzad who did the negotiations with the Taliban and came out with this option, the Afghans would not be disappointed. They had more hope with him because he is an Afghan.
A fellow Afghan.
Okay.
Well, no, he's not an Afghan. I actually said that he's not. He's, of course, he always says it, that he's foremost an American. And I would, not a white man. Let's not make this a racial issue, because a white man would have probably abided by some rules of the game. But here he deployed his kind of street smart tactics and cheating, deceiving peoples
Ambassador, you've
into
also talked.
believing that this was a genuine peace process, while it was not a genuine peace process. It was just a deal which he was commissioned to achieve, and he brutally did it against the Afghan people and against the American blood and treasure. Thousands of Americans fallen in Afghanistan, lost their limbs, and as well as the $2 trillion that American taxpayers paid. That's what the kind of deal he achieved, and that's why President Trump is unhappy with his own
And
deal, which
on
he
top of everything
initiated,
else,
and
Ambassador, on top.
Biden unfortunately implemented, and colossal betrayal of democracy, freedom, all these liberal values that India also espouses.
And also, I think what we forget is the amount of ammunition and the aircraft and all that was left behind. I mean,
Absolutely.
God knows what's happened to all them.
Billions of dollars are leaving behind the equipment now that in the hands of the terrorists, which could easily use against regional and American targets. There's no guarantee. And that's
But
why President Trump has been talking about the Bagram Air Base, something
yes.
that he initiated to lose. And of course, his successor continued to use the same political entrepreneur to implement against the Afghan people, against American interests, and against regional stability. So you should have
So
no place,
should
not only in Afghanistan, but also in India and in the rest of the region.
given India's connections with the Afghan people, should it actually initiate some kind of a regional, meeting, so to speak? Because I mean, India has spoken out very, very strongly at the Shanghai Cooperation, agreement, saying that aid should be sent to Afghanistan. Should we then be the chief mover and shaker behind some kind of a regional compact that brings Pakistan, Iran, China, Russia, and the Central Asian Republic? Because the US
Absolutely.
is
That's why,
clearly,
yeah, that's why first foremost in South Asia we have SARC, which India can, help operationalize, especially when it comes on moral grounds. Secondly, Shanghai Cooperation Organization is there that the agenda is purely security. How come, all these countries get together and talk about security while allowing and engaging with an entity that is detrimental to their core national security interests on the long run, and as well as to regional peace and security. So, which means SCO's failed its own mandate simply because they talk, but not walk the talk when
they
it
don't
comes
walk the talk.
multilaterally. So, India can, initiate any number of steps on its own, on its mini or multi alignment tracks, uh, and as well as regionally speaking. And of course, now given the recent visit of the Foreign Minister Jay Shankar to China, they talked a lot about all these shared interests and common grounds and whatnot, and also the fact that the two countries do have a pragmatic relationship when it comes to a kind of win-win scenario, which they can extend to Afghanistan. And I've written on this when I was a fellow at the ORF, Observe Research Foundation. I wrote a piece, this was before 2021, on how actually China and India, given their multiple shared interests from security to economic and connectivity, can actually help stabilize Afghanistan. Because the problems of Afghanistan are regionally rooted. That's why I'm teaching a graduate course on South Asian affairs. And really, I mean, if the region, the big players, Russia, India, China, the REC, even if we place it within BRICS
Yeah.
or within SCO, they should, and it's in the best long-term interest, help secure Afghanistan. It is tragic
Abs-
that they are not, while each of them claiming to be a global power. If you're a global power, start from your own backyard, for God's sake. Well, China talks about, this creating a community of shared, bright, and secure future. Let's just start it right in your backyard. Let's clean up Afghanistan so that the Taliban are not sheltering ETIM, the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, the Uyghurs, who can be armed at any time and send a suicide terrorist to blow up these beautiful buildings, skyscrapers that China has been, standing up across the country. So this hands-off approach by the region and the big players by India, China, and Russia are totally disappointing
and the
to
US.
people.
And the
Why
US.
should the US come all the way from this part of the world to help secure Afghanistan in the very neighborhood of countries who are claiming to be rising, not regionally, but globally? And yet they don't, either bilaterally or multilaterally, within the very frameworks which they
Yes.
are member states of. SCO, you pointed out, and
Yep.
they just met. And if you take a look at the declaration, each time they issue, yeah, they have all these shared goals that starts in the neighborhood, right? And
Yep.
the rise of Asia when it comes to global South. Well, Afghanistan is very much,
A part
a
of the global
component.
south.
We're right at the heart of Asia. The geography of Afghanistan relates and concerns and affects the core economic and security objectives and goals and interests of each of these three major powers. And yet, unfortunately, they're pursuing a policy of containment of the challenges in Afghanistan and pragmatic transactional engagement with terrorists. It is
Yes.
disappointing, it is tragic, it's not good for India.
Yeah. Mr. Basin, would you like to just counter that in as short a manner as possible? Because I've
So,
run out of time completely.
it's all sounds good, but then we come back to Mr. Trump. in his trade wars and him threatening BRICS, right? So yes, we are a sub-world and we have to live in the real world, and there are contradictions. I hope it was. I hope it, and I
No, what
totally
I'm
agree.
saying, Samir, shouldn't Afghanistan matter more to India, China, and Russia than to the US? If so, because I had a meeting in Moscow, this was a um, meeting on the peace process on Afghanistan, hosted by Russians. And my counterpart was Ambassador Koblov, and the Overlanch, the deputy foreign minister for political affairs, was there, and foreign minister Lavrov was there. And I brought up all these issues because Russia's been complaining about such issues as terrorism and drug production and narcotics, and the presence of NATO facilitating all of that. And I said, Mr. Foreign Minister, but NATO has more or less left Afghanistan. By then it was 2017, and the transition process ended in 2014, and the rest of NATO is abandoning and leaving Afghanistan. So now there's an opportunity for the region. There were 11 countries at the deputy foreign minister level. I said, you're all here, and all of you have leverage and influence and capacities to work with one another under whether bilateral, multilateral, and we have also the frameworks. I brought up SCO. I said, what is SCO doing? Exactly to the point that I made. And of course, Indians were there as well. And I said, why not you work regionally to help address the regionally rooted challenges facing the Afghan people? It's not the
I think
Afghan
we should
people.
give Mr. Bhasin a chance to answer this.
Yeah. And so don't you agree with that?
No, if it was, see, you have to understand the complications. Like I said earlier, if Trump threatens BRICS, right? It's basically when we are. I think if you look at the whatever you may call it, the transition to a multipolar world, and I remember in Raisina dialogue, which started in 2016. It's been really 10 years we've been discussing this, and it's happening. The point is that practically speaking, when you are dividing the world up on basis of trade, and you're complicating things further, and you are threatening each other with sanctions, these ideas seem very good, but how do you implement them? The implementation, like I rightly pointed out earlier in this conversation, to India to just get to Afghanistan is a bloody nightmare, right? It's like a 12-hour road ride, but just to reach there is a nightmare, whether it's Iran sanctions or the blockade by Pakistan.
Well, that's a regional problem. That's because of a lack of normalization between India and
Yeah, so
Pakistan.
there is.
If India and Pakistan resolve their issues, then they wouldn't have any problem accessing Central Asia through Afghanistan. So that's nothing to do with the US. It's between India
I
and
agree.
Pakistan, each claiming to be a major power, especially India claiming to be a global power. If a global power, then normalize relationship with Pakistan under SCO and vice versa. I'm telling Pakistan the same thing, and China as well. If you are hoping all to rise together in Asia, that you think that you are the Asian power, the continent of today and the continent of future, then you should address these core challenges on your periphery.
I'll make it very simple. See, let's start with India. Okay.
Mr. Bhasin, you got the last line, the last word.
India got Pakistan inside. You know our issue with Pakistan, right? You've seen the recent exchange. I don't want to. This conversation is on Afghanistan, so to take too much time on Pakistan, that's another discussion, because we have asked for trade links. Even you remember the tripartite agreement of trade. They allow Afghan treks to come here. They don't allow a pin from India to go back to Afghanistan, right?
That's true.
This is not because we stopped it. We are ready. I was there, and you were there probably in.
So I agree. That's why that I'm saying that these are the structural problems of the region, which only the region must deal with and address, so that then they can address challenges like Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Anyway, we must.
Yeah, because Prime Minister Modi went. I'm not again taking this debate to India Pakistan. He inaugurated the Afghan Parliament, so that showed India's commitment to Afghan's democracy, very frankly, and then he flew to Lahore to make peace with Pakistan. He took a big personal risk, but then we got whatever terrorist attack subsequently. So the problem is that it takes two to tango. These problems are vexed, and also we have to understand. I'll be very clear. I don't want to take too much time. The Western influence, when we're talking of multipolar and everyone, if you're talking about radical means radical elements and left or sorry liberal democracies. President Trump is sitting with a former Al Qaeda terrorist and shaking hands with him, right, in Syria. So you're going swinging both ways. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but the Western
Yeah,
interest.
that's what I pointed out. I agree with you. Right at the very beginning, the question was why the status quo, and I said that the status quo is because of the breakdown of this, a liberal world order,
Yeah,
That's
which is
right.
unfortunately no longer in place. Countries basically wake up and bomb each other, and
right,
no one listens to the UN anymore or
right,
complies with the charter and so many other treaties, and that's
right.
the tragedy of it. And
Anyway, I must end this
yeah.
conversation right now because I've run out of time completely. But I want to thank both of you, and I want to also say clearly that obviously India can't ignore even Beijing's embrace of Pakistan, Pakistan attempting to re-enter Afghanistan and continuing to control a faction of the Taliban. So India has to navigate these multiple strategic challenges. It has to understand there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, and can it hold its nerve and continue to engage in very unpredictable Washington? Thank you very much to all our guests, Mr. Professor Raghav Sharma, Mr. Sumeer Bhasin, and Ambassador Haidari for all your insights into this issue. Please click on the New Indian Express and Global Express icon to watch and subscribe to the show. Thank you, viewers, for watching.